Hello, everyone. My name is Vito Quaglia, and this is A Matter of Principle. Our guest today is Pittston's Mayor, Mike Lombardo. Mike is a visionary leader who has transformed a once distressed small town in northeastern Pennsylvania into a community that's filled with energy, excitement, and hope for its future. So let's welcome him to the show. Welcome, Mayor.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I should say much after that introduction. I might just say goodbye and leave it at that. That was rather generous of you. Thank you.
Well, I will say I stole some of that from an article that I read, I think in Bucknell's magazine, where they interviewed you, and I liked some of the things they said. Plus, I've seen firsthand a lot of the things that have gone on in Pittston, so I meant every word of that. So, but yeah, I'm excited about this. The mayor is someone I've known for a long time, and I really look forward to this interview, and we'll get to talk about some really cool things and some exciting things that have happened maybe in Pittston's past and its future. So, like, for anyone who might not know who you are, let's start off by just having you tell the people who are listening at home a little bit about yourself. How it started for you and how you wound up where you're at right now.
Sure. So I'm Mike Lombardo. I'm the mayor of the city of Pittston. I am in the third year of my fourth term. I was first elected back in 1997. At that point, I was the youngest mayor at 33, elected to the office in the city. I had two terms, 98 through 2005, and then I took a gap in between, stayed involved with the city and went on to a couple boards. But I wanted to raise my children. That was important to me. And they were rolling up on their teenage years, and they were both participating at Pittston area and cross country and track, two sports that I love, and I did not want to miss any of their meets. So I stayed involved, but ducked up the night responsibilities. And then fast forward to 2018, I came back to office for term 3. I'm in term 4 now, and I will be up again next year. And at this point, hopefully I'm running again. So that's kind of the path into office. But let me rewind back then to the beginning. For me, the impetus of running for office wasn't really a desire to be in a political office. At that point, quite honestly, I was pretty naive about what that all meant. But the reason I ran was driven by three things. The first being that I wanted an opportunity for my children to have the experience that I had downtown in my formative and my adolescent years. And while it wasn't the heyday of the city in the late 70s and early 80s, there were still good times to be had. For instance, the American Theater was open. And that was something that was really important to me. And I was very distraught when a decision was made to demolish that theater, back in the late 80s, early 90s, because there was really, no one knew what to do with it. There wasn't really that much wrong with it. But the times had changed, and that platform, wasn't really the way it was. So that was item number 2. And the third one is really more overarching. I was getting tired of people basically knocking the city and talking about how poor the condition was and asking why did it happen. Instead of wasting a lot of time agreeing or engaging in that, I stepped back and said, well, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to sort of ruminate on the past, and I'm not going to write sort of, a eulogy for the city. Let's come up with a plan to move forward. And that's what we did. And that's how my career as mayor was launched.
Well, unlike you, I was born and bred in Pittston, but I do have, my roots are here, my generational roots. When my grandfather came over from Italy, he settled in Yatesville. And on my Irish side, when that grandfather came over, he settled in Avoca. So the greater Pittston area is kind of where, our family came from when they came from the old country, as they say. So I do feel that, that same kind of connection. And also I had cousins that grew up in Duryea, and I remember going to see Pete's Dragon at the American Theater. It's the only time I was ever in the American, but I was a little guy. And so I do remember, the building and what it was like. And I, you see all the revitalization in little towns across, the Commonwealth, but other places in the country as well, where they're replicating those same buildings, right? And if they're lucky enough to still have them, they've kind of refurbished them, and it's, a sense of community pride. So when you lose something like that, you really can't rebuild that, right? Those buildings have such great bones and so much to them in their structure. So it's almost like losing a part of your body, right? For lack of a better word. So I completely understand the passion, behind that. Well, again, we do share a little bit of a connection to Pittston, but in your words, like, why Pittston? What's special about this place that makes somebody like you, who honestly has the resources and the the education to really do anything. Why is a Pittston a place that you wanted to make a difference? That, what makes Pittston special to you?
Well, it's simple. And it's pride. It's about our past. You talked about two ethnicities, your Irish and Italian heritage. I share that, and I'm proud of both of those. But I'm also proud to be an American, and I'm proud to be a Pittstonian. It's just something different here. I think people really care about what they do. And, whether it's good times and we're all celebrating together, or it's bad times and we're knee deep in it and, joining arms and trying to figure out the way, it's different here. And I've always loved that. And, I appreciate you saying I have the opportunity to do other things. And yeah, maybe I did. I'm not sure. I guess that's debatable. But for me, it was never a decision. I'm not one of those people that saw greener pastures somewhere else. My trajectory, and as you know, I spent 22 years in public ed.
Mm-hmm.
My trajectory was doing everything I could to get back here. While I started my first job as a school psychologist out in the Greater State College area, and actually specifically Lewistown, every move that I made subsequent to that first job back to Pocono Mountain got me closer that I could commute and still live in the city. And then, I spent the last 8 years of my tenure in the education field as a school psychologist and special ed director at Pittston area, my home school district. And I'm a very proud product of school district. I'm K through 12 at Pittston area, as are my children. I'd like to think that I had great opportunities there. I was very fortunate to be accepted and attend Bucknell University. And even as proud as I am of that, I'm more proud of the fact that my children, K through 12 products of Pittston area, were both accepted to the University of Notre Dame, and both attended that school, graduated from that school, and secured great jobs. So, there's a lot to offer here. And, I think about growing up as a child and then as a teenager and spending time with, very impressionable and important people in my life. You separate and aside from my parents were my grandparents and my Uncle Mike, who and some other aunts and uncles who really, talked about the heyday of the city. And I often pondered and dreamed how that must have been, back in the day in the 40s and 50s when the city was upward of 20,000 people. So, all of those things fueled it, and I made it a challenge. And I wanted the place that I settled down to be the place I wanted to be from. I didn't want to just be a visitor here. I wanted to be actively engaged.
Yeah, and that is something that maybe the listeners might not know, but I mean, there's Pittston City, itself, and outskirts of it. There's, little boroughs and towns that are still kind of in the greater Pittston circle, if you will, with different developments, with newer homes and things like that. But, you've always been connected to actually, being close to downtown, like really living and working where, 24/7, where things mean something to you. So again, you're not just someone that comes, drives in a half an hour to do something and drives back home or something. You're here every day seeing what's going on.
What's really interesting, is that, you go through life and hopefully each year gets a little bit better for you, whether that's just your general condition or the economics of your life. And as you sort of, get to be a little more successful, you get more and more freedoms, right? You can be more places. So as life has gotten better for me, I've realized that the place that I've always wanted to be is the place exactly where I am. So it really made things easy for me. I've never longed to, live in a development outside of the city. I've owned two older homes here in the city. Both of my residents have been on Broad Street. The first one, I'm proud to tell you, while I did not play quarterback, I could actually throw a football and hit it from City Hall. I'll leave that to my quarterback at the time, Carl DeLuca.
There you go.
Who you all know. His son is a big standout at Penn State now. And then I moved about a block and a half up the street. And so my connection to Main Street has always been a very walkable one. And that's the other, when you ask me why, that's the other reason. And when my children grew up in those two homes, their friends were always at our house. And one of the reasons was that it gave them, before they could drive, a level of freedom to walk downtown to Napoli Pizza and grab a pizza, to walk to the Majestic and grab a burger or a dog, and hit so many other tremendous places that have existed in the city. And I think that's the beauty of the small town.
And I think, Now, you are definitely an expert in this area, so if I go off kilter here a little bit, reel me back in. But I think that's one of the things that draws people to maybe rejuvenated downtowns, like what's happening in Pittston, or even where they create, a small town America model. If they build a new type of development in, an outskirt off a, suburban area off a bigger city, where they have those walkable downtowns. And, back in the day when we grew up, every little neighborhood was, walkable. Every 2 or 3 blocks, you had a corner store and a beer garden, as our grandparents would call it, and a paint store and a drug store, things like that. And every little, you didn't have to get in the car and go to the malls, things like that. Every little neighborhood had things, but that's all gone away. So having something that like walkable neighborhoods where people can still do that and walk a block or two to go to a market or go to some entertainment or things, that people are drawn to that in every corner of this country, and you guys seem like you were ahead of the curve with that. Like I read about it now in different economic development articles and whatnot, but it seems like that's been a vision for Pittston, for years. Am I correct on that, or am I off a little bit?
Yeah. No, you're spot on accurate. It definitely has been the vision for us for 25 years. And quite honestly, I don't want to go on to a rant about knocking the automobile, but because it's got its benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, it's about finding a balance. And I think we shifted too far from sort of that walkability. And when you look at things like the general health of this country, and you look at things like economics, and you look at things like, spiking crime in other places, I think all of those things track to that lack of being from someplace. When you know your neighbor, you behave differently.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to younger people now, and this is not a knock on younger people, but if you say something like a block party, they have no idea. I think they think you're talking about Jenga or something. They don't know that concept, and that's too bad. So we need to get back to some of the basics, not all of the basics. And quite honestly, I think, if you're a Star Wars fan out there, the Death Star, was out there. The internet, in a little bit of a way, is sort of the Death Star to the automobile centric society. It's changing the way things occur. And I don't wish bad on anybody, but we're seeing a rollback, and you're seeing malls start to struggle now. You're seeing multiplex theaters start to struggle now, because I think we vacillated too far from, if you said to somebody, hey, I'm coming up with this concept for a shopping center, it literally is lanes of a highway and you can drive through each of the aisles, people would do that. And there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with somebody that lives in a neighborhood and has no idea who their neighbors are. That does not make for good life. And that's where happiness is found, I think, in our interactions with people. So that was something for me, and having a psychology background and understanding the change paradigm and some of those sort of, theoretical things are what we try to overlay and start to do in the city way back when, maybe ahead of the curve. And I feel like if you look at the metrics now through this 25 years, so it truly is kind of a longitudinal study, you see that some of those things that we hypothesized and theoried have come to fruition. And, we're in a really good spot now. And I think the best days are really ahead of us. And I think most people out there know that I'm a big music fan. So I will quote Bachman Turner Overdrive. You ain't seen nothing yet. There are some really big years ahead of us. And I'm super excited about what the possibility of a term 5 brings for me and the city.
Well, and I can't wait to see, the future as well, because you guys have, everything you've been doing so far, has taken, some thought, nothing's really been rushed into. There's been, really strategic planning on what you're doing to get your funding, to make sure the plans actually work. So you guys have been very deliberate in what you've been doing. And it's so far, everything's been, moving in the right direction. And you, whatever you're doing, whoever you're talking to, whoever your Svengali is, it's working. So, please keep it up. And one of the things, that we talk about on this podcast with people, whether you're from education or sports or the business world, it's the concept of innovation, but also balancing that with traditional things that work. And I think when you talk about, a small town, the heart of the small town, you want to have some new things that are innovative, that'll draw people there that kind of want to see what's going on. But then the traditional way that like people interact, like the sense of actual community. And the hard thing I think to replicate is, you can't fast forward anything. You can't make certain parts of the neighborhood or blocks in the city multi-generational. You don't have 75 years to see grandparents and, sons and daughters coming through. That's what we had, back in the day when everyone stayed in the same little areas and, lived where their aunts and uncles and grandparents were. And that's where you didn't mess around because you knew your great aunt or maybe, your grandmother's bingo partner was, watching when you were running through the yards, picking tomatoes from the garden or whatever. But it's hard. So you have to really build something where people want to come and share that positive energy, because now it might not be because the bonds are made by blood and family. It's the bonds of people who want and share those same values. Are you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, it's funny when you talk about innovation and you talk about technology, I actually, this past Friday had the opportunity to sit on a panel with Mayor Cognetti from Scranton up at Tech Bridge in Scranton. And, one of the things we were talking about was innovation and sort of technology, kind of running together. And what does that all mean? So, what it means for us in the city is that I embrace innovation and I embrace technology. And what those two things have allowed us to do is really build capacity. So we need less people to do task A, but that doesn't mean we need less people to do the overarching things we do in the city. And where I'm going with that is by being able to be more effective in one area, and needing less people in that area allows you to expand your capacity and fill in places where you never thought you could have staff. And I will say what I've said over and over, short of Pittsburgh, and I don't mean, this is not a criticism of any other city. Hopefully it's something that other places can look at and aspire to. Short of Pittsburgh, I would stack my team up against, and I would stack them up against Pittsburgh. I'm not afraid of Pittsburgh. Let the mayor, who I know well, pick his top 5 people, and I'll pick my 5 people, and we will have a municipal survivor. Pretty certain that the city of Pittston will fare pretty well in that competition. We have capacity to do things that we've never done before, and those things allow us to continue to move the ball down the field. And when our partners, the state, the county, and the federal government look at us, they look at that capacity. They don't say, oh, they can't do that. And I got one of my favorite compliments, and I will preface this. This is not a political statement. This is a statement of reality. In fact, one of my favorite compliments that I've gotten happened recently. And we happened to be in a boxing gym, so take the context of that. But Congressman Cartwright, introducing me, said that myself and the city of Pittston punch above our weight class. I love that compliment.
Yeah, that's great.
That speaks to capacity. And the other thing that I'll tell you, and I love sports, and sports have played a critical role in my life. As I've tried to build my team here in the city, I like players that are multi-talented, that aren't siloed. And long before Jimmy Cefalo went to the Miami Dolphins, I was a Miami Dolphin fan. And I've been a Miami Dolphin fan since they came into the league. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it was that I was 4 years old and the little dolphin seemed appealing to a kid. I don't know. But for whatever reason, I've been a Dolphin fan. And for those of you out there that are Dolphin fans, in the late 80s, there was a player named Jim Jensen who was a multifaceted player. He could play quarterback. He was a defensive back. He was on special teams. He was great on special teams. As a matter of fact, he earned a name of Jim Crash Jensen, because he so aggressively ran down the field on kickoffs and the receiving teams that he got that name. But he could kick, he could punt. So you need players like that, because you can't have people that just do one thing anymore. If you do, you're just going to be stuck in the rut you're in. So, that's sort of my theory on innovation, technology, and people.
Well, and since you opened up the door, sports was a big part of your life growing up. Who were some of the coaches you had that were impactful in creating the adult version of Mike Lombardo?
So, separate and aside from my parents, the people that have had the most significant impact on my life have been coaches. and I'm going to name them my name because it's important to do that. Bob Barberi, and I'll talk about it in general, but Bob Barberi is one football coach. Also, Joe Costello, Joe Orlando, Ray Calabrese, and Mike Orlando on the track side. But then I was even fortunate to go to Bucknell, and I had a great coach there named Art Goulden, and they all taught me not necessarily only about the sport and the technical pieces of the sport, but I think because of my interactions with those people, I hope to think I'm a better person, and they helped shape who I am and how I respond to getting knocked down and how fast I get back up and how I respond to being prepared. I was very fortunate my senior year in football to play in the Unico game. And actually, the coach at that time was Charlie Fick and Mickey Gorham from Myers. And Mickey was a great football player and actually a Notre Dame grad. And during that game, I was playing wide receiver, and two different times I was down the field in a position to make a goal block that allowed the running back, who happened to be a guy named Joe Baker, who oddly wound up being at Bucknell with me, and allowed him to score twice. And I remember coming to the sidelines and Coach Gorham saying, I can tell that you are a product of Bob Barberi because you play to where the ball is. And that's the way Bob always taught us to play. Just because you're on the left side and the play is to the right, don't just go through the motions. Be in a place where you can make a difference in the future where the ball gets. And that's a really, I think, valuable lesson that transfers in life. And then I had a great, and I think you mentioned the Bucknell thing, and I referenced this story. I went to Bucknell, and it was an extremely talented team. And, it's tough to do that sometimes. You come out of high school and, you're sort of at the top of the pile and you have a good career. And I went to Bucknell, and there were so many other athletes there. I was in awe of their talent. But I really, really wanted to, in addition to make the team, which I did, make the travel squad. And I did that. So I got to run in this meet, and I worked so hard. And I ran one of the best races I've ever run. And I came around, it was an 800 meter, 2 laps. I came around the last turn, and I just could not hold off the 3 people that were right with me. And I wound up coming in 4th, and I wound up probably setting a personal best of maybe 3 or 4 seconds. And I remember being frustrated and coming off the track and just like kicking the ground and really, quite honestly, being pissed off. And Coach Golden came up to me and said, don't ever do that again. That is a terrible reflection on who you are as a person. And why are you doing that? And I said, because I didn't win. He said, yes, you did. You worked harder than you ever worked. You made it to this race, and you ran 3 seconds better. Winning sometimes isn't coming in first, second, or third. It's winning with different parameters, and always stay focused on what it is that you're trying to do. So those are just like 2 sort of lessons for me that came out of athletics. And that's the true definition of a coach is, what they give to athletes. One of the things I'm most proud of right now has nothing to do with the city of Pittston. It has to do with the fact that my daughter coached cross country and track. Yes, over Arming area. That was a little difficult to swallow. But I saw her as a coach. I saw her as a coach of people. And if I could give her an award, I'd give her the Bob Barberi Art Goulden Award, which means that what you imparted on the athletes that you interacted with will stay with you long through life.
And so much of who we become, later on in life is shaped by, those people who are with us during time of, competition, adversity, and all those things in between. And you look back on it. And another connection that we have, which I didn't know, we know each other, but I didn't know this. When I played Unico probably a couple of years after you out of Bishop Hoban, my coach on that squad was Mickey Gorham and Charlie Fick. And we actually, on the other side, it was Coach Barberi and Frank Para. And we played, that Unico game was the game at Pittston High School when they rededicated it for Charlie Trippi. So back in 1988. Oh. So that's all, like we came all the way around there with that, but same thing. And I was going to ask you a question and, I'm doing this podcast in my eyes years too late because some of the people like a Mickey Gorham, Bob Barberi to talk to those guys and hear their stories would be tremendous. But well, Mickey imparted some wisdom to me. I remember when I missed a block and he told me all about it at halftime. And in my head, I'm thinking, this is an all-star game. And he went up and down me like we're in the state championship, but he's a great guy. And he was an intimidating figure, a big guy. And, just,
Oh yeah.
he almost seemed like superhuman, so those guys who actually played at Myers for him. And, you guys that played for Coach Barberi, and I got to know Coach Barberi later on. I'm very close to his son, Nick. I'm godfather to little Nick. And, so I got to meet, the softer, gentler Coach Barberi, who was more like, Yoda in his late years, and, would always impart, knowledge to Nick and I when we were young coaches. And, so those strong leaders that, we were lucky enough to be around when we were, growing up, I think means so much. And that's where I always try to talk to guys who are leaders and coaches now to see what they're doing to groom the next generation of leaders and coaches. So when you say that about your daughter, that's really awesome, because who's going to be the next generation? Who's going to be the next Coach Barberi and Coach Gorham, who's going to impact, their student athletes going forward. So that's awesome to hear about your daughter.
Yeah. And thanks. And I'll tell you the other thing is interesting. So, on my dresser that I have to look at every morning when I get dressed to go to work, I have four actually, the little things you get when you unfortunately go to a funeral home and somebody has passed, little cards with their picture on it. I have four people to remind me of values every day that I get up and go there. And it's my dad, my mom, my father-in-law, Bob Donovan, and Coach Barberi. They're the four people that unfortunately they had to pass to get onto that little area, but they're there for a reason. I don't want to ever forget the lessons that those four people imparted on me. So the impact of coaches is so critical. And I see some really good ones out there, and I get very disappointed in the ones that, sort of grind through athletes and they don't really care about the athlete as a person. I know that to this day, I could pick up the phone and call Joe Costello and say, hey, coach, I need to ask you something. And he wouldn't say, why are you calling me? That's a good coach. And till the last breath I take, I will respect those people.
Well, and I kind of lump, coaching, teaching, leading in general together in certain areas. And in one area in particular, this is a quote from someone, I'm stealing it, who said that, teaching is important because it matters, but it's really important because it matters every day. Because, what you do and how you act and what you say, the people that you're teaching or leading or coaching, that resonates, and I echo what you're saying. Sometimes these people, men or women, who are doing it for the wrong reasons and don't realize that, their attitude towards a student athlete or a word they use, that kid takes that home and is going to live and die on how you treat them, and is going to really have an influence on the kind of young person they develop into. So having the right people in leadership roles is so important. And that's why, we kind of keep going back and beating on that dead horse, for lack of a better cliche, of, why leadership is so important. So my next question for you is, in your leadership style, I definitely think there's, in my eyes, and people I know who I've talked to about you, they don't really define you as one specific kind of leader. But how would you kind of define your leadership style?
Well, that's really funny, because I have an answer that you might find entertaining, because I've been asked that once or twice. And, the best answer is the answer you don't think about, and you just answer. And, I said to you before this podcast, don't send me questions. I don't really want them, because it kind of ruins for me, it ruins the flow. I think it makes you be somebody that you're not. So about 3 years ago, I was asked to speak. I was trying to get Alvernia University out of Reading to come up here, and they asked me to come down and speak and do sort of this, where the city has gone and, where I see the city going and why the school can fit in. And I did that. And then afterwards, I had an open 15 or 20 minutes of questions. And somebody asked me to describe myself as a leader. And without thinking much, and I like to be a little bit, non-serious sometimes and sort of laugh at things. I said, well, what you need to do is you need to get a NutriBullet or a blender, and you take a little P.T. Barnum, a little Frank Rizzo, a little bit Leo Buscaglia. And for those of you that don't know out there who that is, Buscaglia was a writer in the 70s and 80s that, he had this theory that if you can be kind to a person and they're kind to a person and everybody does that to like 10 people, you have this like great sort of pyramiding effect that goes through. So that's the Leo Buscaglia part. And then, throw on top of that, I'd like to think I'm a little bit of a B.F. Skinner, who's a psychologist in behavior modification. And then to round that all out, I'll drop in Franklin Roosevelt because he's a leader that I liked. And I liked him because his tenure as president was so different, each of the phases. So you got all that stuff in there and you put it on the blender or into the NutriBullet and you let it go for about 25 to 32 seconds. And that's what you get out of the end. You get the Mike Lombardo leadership style. And that's to say, when I need to be a hard ass, I can be Frank Rizzo. When I need to tell the tale about our city, because I think a big part of a mayor's responsibility is to be a huge cheerleader. And, that's when I'm P.T. Barnum. So that's kind of who I am as a leader. I do what I need to do, and I don't like to be pigeonholed. Just like I don't like to be pigeonholed. And, I'm a Democrat, but I don't let that define who I am. I let my actions and I think what needs to be done at the time define who I am. And I hope that, here 25 years later, I think I've had some level of success with that.
Yes, I definitely think you've been quite the successful mayor and leader of your town or city, actually. There was something, another teacher friend of mine back in the day once referenced, and I don't know if this was right or if he was just trying to, throw a fact out there to impress me, and I wouldn't be able to look it up. But he said at one time, probably back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, Pittston was actually designated as a port or something because of the use of the river. So maybe back in the coal days or something. But he had some type of local history map of Pennsylvania back in the day. So you're dealing with so much of the present and future of Pittston City, but it has quite a historical significance in so much of things that have gone on in the Commonwealth and, ultimately the country as a whole because of so many things that happened here. And, I have a trifecta of things that happened in 18 months between 57 and 59 that we'll talk about at a different time. And it has to do with the Knox mine, the Appalachian and the garment industry and how three things that all connected to Pittston, had a tremendous effect on the national culture. But we'll talk about that that'll be a separate episode just for Pittston. But you talked about, that the Lombardo smoothie, you gave us the ingredients for that, which is awesome. I wrote that all down off that.
It's actually a little bit of a roughie, not a smoothie.
All right. And so in all those things, in all those different, chameleon-like ways you have to be, how do you handle criticism? Because it's going to come. If you're going to lead, you're going to be criticized. Don't you handle it? Do you not even care what people think, or do you look at anything, read anything, listen to anything when the critics come?
Well, let me say this. We live in a difficult age now, in that everybody's got a forum to speak their minds, and I respect that. And I think there's a difference. So, do I care what people think? I absolutely do. Anybody out there that tells you they don't care what people think have to be a full-blown sociopath. And I don't think there's that many of those statistically. And I speak from experience and fact from my psychology life. So everybody cares about what people think. And sure, it took me a little bit of time. And I'll tell you why it took me a little bit of time. It's no different than going onto the field for a football game on a Friday or Saturday night. Nobody goes onto the field and wants to lose. At bare minimum, maybe a tie is acceptable, but not really, because, a lot of people consider that a loss. So yeah, I very much care what people think, but it doesn't shape who I am. When there's validity to it, it shapes my action. Look, I'm 25 years in, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I've made mistakes. And quite honestly, Vito, you're an educator. You know that the best students in school aren't the ones that only raise their hand when they absolutely know the answer. They raise their hand, the best students, when they're sort of sometimes unsure. And the other part of that coin is that you can't also be afraid to answer when you don't know at all. So there's a level of risk in there. So criticism's a rough thing. I mean, sometimes I get really pissed off and I act like Frank Rizzo. And then other times, I guess I'm a little more like Leo Buscaglia, and I think, well, maybe this person is having a bad day. But I always try to take apart what it is that's said. You know, I don't really mind if you have something to say and you think I'm the worst mayor. I'm okay with that. I mean, I think just as long as you can defend your point. But the problem is in this day and age, nastiness has been confused with constructive criticism. There is nothing wrong with constructive criticism. I have an opportunity to meet with a lot of my peers, and in the Northeast, we're really fortunate that we've got a good cadre of mayors that work together and we share ideas and stories and we share the times that we stumble. So, I'm okay with that. But look, I don't think any of us will ever be okay with mean and nasty. And sometimes it hurts. And, in this day and age of things like Facebook and Instagram and all of those things, sometimes people are just nasty to be nasty. So I don't put a lot of stock in that. We talked about teachers that have had an important impact in life. And I had a professor in college whose name was Roger Tarpey at Bucknell. And he used to say, it was a statistics class, what gets measured gets done. So I've always tried to use my sort of, I know what my report card looks like should be based on the following 15 metrics, and none of them are whether you really like me or not. But that's kind of irrelevant. But look, at the end of the day, I can say this. There aren't too many mayors that I know of across the Commonwealth, and I say this experience, they can say that we've had millions of dollars of construction that have occurred downtown, and we've not had a tax increase in 15 years. And I don't see a need for a tax increase because we have grown our community and we've grown our economic base. So when I get criticism, I step back and first I ask myself, why is this person saying that? Is it truly because there's something that I need to be criticized on? Is there another reason? Are they having a bad day? Or are they just not a Mike Lombardo fan? And quite honestly, there's probably 35% of the population out there that aren't. And that's okay. I mean, you're not going to please everybody. I just try to do my best to stay focused on what my job is. And my job as mayor, nowhere have I found that being liked is part of the job. So if you like me, thank you. That's an added bonus. But I hope everybody can respect it and like what we're doing. And if they don't, that's the beauty of our country and this process. I will be up for election again next year. If you don't like what I'm doing or think you can do a better job, I encourage you. There's nothing wrong with competition. It's really not that complicated to go and get 100 signatures to get on the ballot, and you should do that and make a difference. But, don't be a Monday morning quarterback, because there's not an NFL game that I can't win on the subsequent Monday. And that's sort of where I go. And, 25 years in, I'm less bothered by the negativity, but on some days I'm bothered even more, if that makes any sense.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure there's there's criticism. There, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot of justification for it because, my wife grew up in Pittston. She's from the Oregon section. That's where her family's been for generations. So I've been, coming to Pittston to visit. We met in high school. So from the 80s on, I've been up here, and there's been a tremendous transformation from the times I remember coming through, and even hearing the old stories. My grandmother actually worked, I think, at Pearl's Pizza, if that's a name that sounds right for, if you remember the old days.
Yeah.
And she worked in the hospitality shop. My grandmother did at Pittston Hospital. So, and then, it fell on some hard times in the 70s and 80s and whatnot. And to see the transformation to where it is now is incredible. And I implore anybody who hasn't visited downtown Pittston that they should, because it's a neat little place. But my question, and I'm really interested in the answer, how do you and how does your team, how do you forecast and strategically plan the projects that you do? Like how far out in advance do you think about, hey, we're going to move the power lines and bury them, or we're going to, set up, we're going to acquire these buildings and then transform them into this area, and we're going to use it. Like how does that process work?
Well, I'm a firm believer in long-term planning. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I have had the honor to be able to go and speak to a bunch of municipalities across. And, one of the things I talk about is before you do anything, come up with a plan. And the beauty of the plan is it's really your roadmap of how you get there. So my short answer is we forecast things out long term. Now we have some short term goals because, there's things we have to do every day, right? Our basic responsibilities, our core responsibilities, but there's some big things and you're going to see in the next 24 months, some huge things. A new 500-seat theater being built downtown, an 8-story building being built downtown, a 4-level parking lot being built downtown, you know, millions of dollars of investments. And that takes long-term planning. And I have a wall in my office that's sort of my wall of dreams that are these ideas. So you can't do everything at once. So you got to do long range. And I said a long time ago, one of the theories I had way back in 97 when I was running was that I felt like the most underproducing part of the city was our downtown because it had fallen so far from where it was. You had a low occupancy rate. You had businesses that had moved out. The American Theater was gone. And it was very much of a linear Main Street. And what I mean by that is there wasn't much happening in those buildings that had multi floors. There wasn't much happening in floors 2, 3, or 4. And if, they were bigger in floors above that. So I thought that if we could turn around what really should be for those monopoly players out there, Boardwalk and Park Place, we could have some financial gains. And those financial gains would lead to stability. In 1998, the city was on the verge of going to distress status. And that's the very formalized process where the state comes in and they work with you on getting things together. Because we adopted a plan quickly in 1998, we were able to avert that. And I'm proud to tell you that, in 2024, we have a Moody's investment grade credit rating that's been upgraded once. And I'm hoping that at the end of this year, it'll be upgraded again. Some of the other metrics that are important is I mentioned to you that, we haven't had a tax increase in 15 years. And we're working on our budget right now and there's no increase in taxes built into it. We have now begun to capture some of that value from downtown and push out into the neighborhood and create some of our own self-funding grant programs. And I'm bragging a little bit, and I'm bragging not only for me, but for the team that's here and some of those that have sort of retired since. We've been recognized at the state and national level and have received a bunch of awards for our planning. And I actually do this presentation that's called The Blueprint for Success, and it really talks about what I call the 9-point plan. And it's a long-term plan. So we're not playing the short game anymore. We're playing the long game. Our short periods of time are 5 years. We're really looking out 10 and 15 years and trying to project, where do we need to be? What are the threats out there? Where are the potential benefits? If we go to all electric cars, and I'm certainly not advocating that, or this is not a pitch for that, but how does that change the dynamics downtown? If X happens, how does that? You have to think that way because it's again. Let's go back to sports. If you don't continue to stay in shape or try to get better at whatever the position is that you play, then you flatline, and somebody else comes along and does a much better job. So it's constant, it's long term, and I believe in that, and it's the first thing I tell anybody. And I remember. And Eddie Ackerman, who has pointed this out a bunch of times, in an early interview with him, I suggested that doing streetscape downtown, which means putting in new sidewalks and vintage lights and going underground with some of the utilities so you don't have those unsightly wires overhead on Main Street, would make a huge difference. In 25 years later, it actually looks like I know what I was talking about. It made a difference.
Yep.
Yeah. Streetscape has been really critical. So you got to play the long game because, that's what this is. And for me, it's been a really long game. It's been a big chunk of my life. And it's been, it's been a quarter of a century that I've been involved. That's hard to even say with the city. And I think there's a lot more to do. And that's why, I want to stick around a little bit longer and finish the long-term things that I really want to do here with my team.
Well, and just like when I speak to coaches, the importance and the impact that consistency has in programs. So if you have a coaching staff and a head coach that stays somewhere for a few decades and all the assistants are there, then, and you have that consistency in the quality of play, regardless of the sport. So that consistency, in your leadership in the city is, you can see the results when you don't have, a new mayor every term and somebody coming in with all different agendas where nothing really gets done. You're just kind of treading water. But you and your team have a plan, you stick to it, you're consistently building towards the future, and the process works, right? Now,
Right.
there's a lot of things that you're excited about. You can tell by the way you brag about things happening and your people. But what's the best thing about being the mayor of Pittston? Like what would you say is the coolest thing about what you do? The thing you're most, what you enjoy the most about it.
Well, I love interacting with people and meeting people and hearing their stories and meeting other people that do the job that I do. And a year ago, I had the distinct honor to serve as the president of the municipal league, and I got to interact with mayors all across the Commonwealth and hear their stories and talk back and forth and share ideas. And I love that. But what I love the most, if I had to just pick one word, it's pride. It's I think it's back. I think we're proud. We're not, there was a time, that the city kind of became the butt of the joke. And I love when people tell me that. As a matter of fact, I have to tell you this. It's a great story. Jumpin' Jeff Walker from Kersey had me on a show about 2 years ago, and we had this really interesting exchange. And Jeff basically said to me, "Hey, I'm sorry about the Pittston Man thing. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It was
yeah.
like this spoof song that he did."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What are you apologizing for?" Those are the kind of things that motivated me to make a difference, because I thought they were a fuel for a commentary on a day that was lost, a better day of the city, and I believed we could get back there. He said, "Well, you definitely have." So that's why I'm apologizing for that. You don't apologize for that. Those are the things that, making a difference. I think I and my team, and that includes the electeds, and it includes people, like, and look, let's be realistic. I mean, the mayor that was here before me was a guy named Tom Walsh, who was a great guy,
Mm-hmm.
who did some really good things. But, there comes a point when it's just time to put a different team on the field. And I think that's where we got to. But I'm grateful for, some of the vision and foresight that Tom Walsh had before I got here. And then, subsequent to me, Joe Keating came and did some good things. And I can't say enough about Mayor Klush, who served 2 terms here in the city, and really, shared a very identical philosophy to me. So, you know, we worked very closely together, and Jay is now a part of my team. So, I have great respect for that. And there's a lot of people that deserve a ton of credit. Some of them have retired, like Jerry Malarkey from Community Development, and most recently, Joe Moskowitz, who was our city administrator, Savino Benita, who was my first manager, and now is over in West Pittston. Everybody's got, a part in this thing, and it's not one person. I think my responsibility is, maybe to call the plays and get everybody back organized in the huddle. And I think we huddle a lot and get back together. Because it's not always good to play, no huddle offense. You make a lot of mistakes doing that. And that goes back to the question you asked me about the long term and having a game plan. So, I believe in huddles. I believe in watching the films and, sort of coming up with a plan not only for this season, but who's the person behind, the left tackle that can step in if they go out? Who else can run the good leg on that relay team? So if something bad happens, you can keep moving forward. And I think that's what long-term planning does. And I would think that, one of the things that, when you talk about, what am I proud about? I'm proud that I think I've been able to take my experience from Pittston area and my experience from sports and my experience at Bucknell and the experience I had with teachers and my parents and, my family, and hopefully have an impact on an area and make a difference. So, those are the things for me that matter.
Well, and it's evident. It's evident in the way you carry yourself, and the way that you care about your friends and your family, not just the city and what you do in your career, but just the way the kind of person that you are. And anyone who's ever met you, knows that. And even people who probably meet you for the first time, it comes across in the way you converse with people. And I think one of the things that really has to happen when someone has this kind of success is timing, right? So I think your team were took over at a time when it was right, because all the downtowns had that kind of that loss period where they were competing with malls, or should they compete with malls? They're not. It's not the downtown glory days as as it once was, that our grandparents talked about, walking to all the little stores and going to the movies for a nickel, things like that. So every little town kind of went through that, where they didn't know how to redefine themselves. But the timing of it was right. The kind of people that you have together with you with the same plan. You found the way to get the resources and the funding, and then you had a mission and a goal, and you guys attacked it. And I think that, and what you have done, really, that blueprint thing you're talking about, there's so many other Pittston-like situations all over the country that, downtowns have fallen by the wayside because of whatever. Like, if you look at the movie Cars, with Radiator Springs, when they put, the highway was put in, and so now that you didn't have to drive through the little town. There's always, ways that places have to evolve, and you guys found a way that works for you. And I'm sure other places probably want to steal that Pittston model, and that's why they have you come and talk and explain the seeds that you planted to make these things happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, and I love doing that. And I would say that there are a bunch of really good places in the Commonwealth that are working hard to reinvent themselves. And I'll locally we have a bunch. And again, I think Wilkes-Barre is doing a great job, and I think Scranton is doing a great job, and Mayor Cassatt, my friend Hazelton, is doing a good job. And I think you're going to see some great things in the next year or two that are happening up in Anticoke. Carbondale's got a new elected mayor, and she will do great things up there. But I want to give a shout out. A friend of mine, Derek Slaughter, who is the mayor of Williamsport, is doing some really cool stuff in Williamsport, and we're working together, on a couple issues. And I have another friend across the state, Matt Pacifico, who happens to be a Republican mayor in Altoona, PA, and Matt is doing some great things. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening, and we all learn from each other. And again, you're an educator, so you know this. The day you stop learning is the day that, you might as well just not go out. Every day is a learning experience. And, every day is about getting knocked down and getting back up. Every day is about small victories and some defeats. It's just the way it is. And, again, if you stay focused on everything and you think about the long term, then I think you're a little bit less apt to be paralyzed by some of those failures, because we're going to all have them. And, like you said, I once said to somebody, I'm really fortunate, and I think I have a responsibility. I have had very difficult days and hard days, but I've never had a hard life. And I'm fortunate for that. And if I can't do a little something to give back, then I don't know, there's something wrong. And, the other thing I want to say that, you asked me about the things that I'm proud of. At the end of the day, the two things that I'm most proud of have nothing to do with the city of Pittston. They're my two children, Catherine and Kristen, who just every day really just impress me in the things they do. And you talk about a team. This job requires tons of sacrifice, and it also requires me to have another job and do other things. And I've been very fortunate to work for bosses like my current boss, Brent Berger at Quattre, who tolerates a lot of the mayoral stuff, sometimes getting in the way of my job that pays the bills. And, all the sacrifices of nights and days couldn't have been achieved without my wife, who picked up the slack, my wife Susan, at home when, there were things that I couldn't do. I've missed vacations. I've tried not to do that. I'm very proud to say I did not miss any sporting events of my children. You can see where my priorities are. But it's all about teamwork, and it's not just one dimension of your life. You know it. You have a family. you have a school family. You know all this stuff. I mean, it's just so it's at the end of the day, it's rewarding. And while I have some nights that are sleepless and unrestful, I have a lot of peaceful ones that I look on those things and think, I'm pretty lucky. So, for me, I'm appreciative of that. I've been given a lot of opportunities, and I hope that, my parents looking down don't think I squandered those opportunities, that I took advantage of them.
No, absolutely. I think that, that concept of, servant leadership and self-sacrifice and, trying to, leave the place better than you found it, you were raised right. And like so many of us that grew up in the communities in Northeast PA, they were the values that we had that, our grandparents and parents instilled in us. And to see you taking advantage of the resources and, honestly, the blessings you've been given and using them, to provide for the future of not just your family, but for the community. That's what it's all about. So you are, in addition to having the blueprint for how to maybe mechanically and, the X's and O's of how to transform and to redefine a city, you have the blueprint on how to be that kind of servant leader. So it was, I'm going to wrap up, but it was really a pleasure to have you on to talk about some of those things. And I'll probably, reach out to you some months down the road to kind of, connect again and see what else is happening in the city. But, I just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciated this. This was like a really fun conversation. Got to learn a lot about, you and the plans for the city and whatnot. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. And, opportunity is a two-way street. So I appreciate, I always say this, whether it's a podcast or whether it's, an interview in a paper or an interview on one of the television stations. I'm always thankful for those people that, give us the opportunity to sort of, spread the word and talk about the things we're doing, because, sometimes people just don't know. And it's weird to think that in a time in life when communication seems so easy, something you just don't know. So I appreciate all these opportunities. So I want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been very fun. And quite honestly, these conversations are good and everybody should do them, because I think they make you sort of refocus and get back to basics. Sometimes you forget why it is you started, and sometimes you forget where it is that you think you're headed. So thanks for reminding me.
Well, listen, it was a pleasure. Like I said, we look forward to, future plans and projects in Pittston. And for anyone who never got a chance to get down there, in August. What are the dates of the Tomato Festival coming up, Mayor?
So the Tomato Festival starts next Thursday, the 15th, and it runs through Sunday. We're all hands on deck now, so please come and join us. I will tell you, I'm very excited that Saturday of the festival, the Reading Northern train is coming up from south of us and bringing about 600 plus additional people here to the city to experience the great festival in our great city.
Well, that's going to be great, because that was something my mother-in-law, Mary Pollicare, 93 years old, up in Oregon there, was asking me, what are they going to do with that train? Are they going to bring people to Pittston? When are the people going to come to Pittston? All these people from Pittston going to Jim Thorpe. So she'll be very happy that people are coming here using the train to see some of the great things happening in the city.
Great.